My name is Monique and I'm from Ladybug's Cabin, and today we're going to talk a little bit about one of my favorite tools in the toolbox, Inktense pencils. I love to use these coloring on fabric in a number of different ways. We're just going to talk about a couple of them today. One of the reasons that I love them is because they are permanent on fabric even if you're just using water. Any other watercolor pencil you can use on fabric, but you're going to have to use a textile or a fabric medium in order for those colors to bond into the fibers of the fabric itself. With the Inktense pencils, because there's an ink pigment in the pencil itself, as soon as it's activated with what medium or water or even aloe vera gel, it's permanent after it's dried. So that's a beautiful thing, that you can use these pencils to create very unique, lovely works of art that can even be washable and incorporated into your quilts. I love to use them on applique in order to give myself a little bit more definition if the fabric didn't quite do exactly the job that I wanted to. I also love to color in fabric. So if I've got a black and white fabric, or say I've done a little embroidery stitch with a single color thread, you can then color it in and have something really unique and wonderful. A great way to involve kids in their own quilts, making the colors exactly as they want. You can also create unique little pieces of art based completely off of using the pencils, coloring in everything and then adding a little bit of thread art if you're like me and are a thread enthusiast as well. So let's just go over a few ways that I like to use the pencils. This is just a little demonstration. If you're interested in getting more information or having a class with me, please just let me know. Let's get started. Okay, so let's talk first about the things that you want to have on hand in order to do a little bit of playing. First out of the gate, I really suggest that you use something that already has lines on it. So you can use a piece of black and white fabric or a few other options that I'll talk about in a second. But this is probably the easiest way to get started and just to play. So I've got my black and white fabric, and what I've done is I've put it on a piece of freezer paper. And what that allows it to do is it stabilizes the fabric, so when I'm working on it, then it doesn't move around as much. And it also acts as a moisture barrier. So if I get really overzealous with my medium or my water, it's going to protect the surface that I'm working on, so I don't have to worry about protecting my table as much if I'm using the freezer paper. If as you're working, if you tend to brush too much and it starts to come off the freezer paper, you can simply just take this back over to your pressing station and turn it over, usually on a pressing mat, just to protect any live color that's happening, and iron it back down again. I've got a few pencils out, ready to go. A pencil sharpener, just in case they get dull. I have some stiff paintbrushes. They don't have to be expensive, they just need to be really stiff. The good thing about working with the fabric medium is that the more you use the medium with these paintbrushes, if you don't do a thorough job of actually washing them out, they get really stiff, and that's actually beneficial for this kind of work. So some stiff paintbrushes in some various sizes. I also have some water brushes out and full, so that you have water in the back capsule here. If you don't have water brushes, you can just get a container. I save old containers, and put a little bit of water in this, and then you can just dip your paintbrush in the water and out. This can be a little bit more messy, but it works. The water brushes are a lot easier and a lot more neat, especially if you're traveling around or you have a limited space that you can play in. I do have a fabric medium because we're going to be working in some smaller details. This will stop the color from blossoming as much or blooming as much as water will. I've also got a little bit of iridescent medium out in case I want to add a little shine to certain areas. And in a pinch, you can also use aloe vera gel to activate your color, which means to get your color wet on your pencils. I don't like it as much as I do the medium or water, but it certainly does work. And some people actually prefer it, so I say try all things and find your favorite thing. So you can work a number of different ways using the Inktense pencils. You can work on dry fabric and then add the moisture to activate it, or you can work on wet fabric and then work with a more vibrant pencil out of the gate. I'll show you both. Again, I really do recommend that you try it both directions, because you might find one day you like it better doing it this way, and another day you're going to like it better the other. The more tools you have in your tool chest, the more fun you're going to have, and then you'll be able to troubleshoot if you don't like what's happening in one versus the other. So let's just start here on this flower. I'm going to add just a little bit of a light pass on this pencil. And the fun thing about these is it's not going to look like much until I activate it. I'm not pressing very hard. I'm just getting a little bit of color down. And then I'm going to take just a tiny bit of medium on my paintbrush, and I'm going to come and activate that color. And as you can see, as the medium activates that pencil, it becomes vibrant and beautiful. While this is still wet, or with the medium on there, if I wanted to come back with the same color or even with a different color and add in a little bit of shading, I can come back then again with my paintbrush and blend those two colors together. I think I want a little bit darker around the edges. So in working with the fabric medium or textile medium, I have no problem bringing my color directly to the edge and where I'm working at. If I've used a lot of medium, it might travel outside that line, but more than not, it's going to stay where I've placed it. When I work with water, I do it a slightly different way, where I'm going to allow the water to do some of the traveling for me and not take things directly out to the line that I'm trying to create. So as you can see, it doesn't take a ton of color. Again, here I'm going to work on another dry to wet, and then I'll show you one that's wet to dry. So I put my pencil down, I add a little bit of medium to my paintbrush. I want to match this leaf, so I'm going to come back and darken that area a little bit more. One of the joys of using Inktense pencils is that you can get a much more vibrant color than you normally can using just traditional watercolor pencils. Again, it all comes down to having that ink pigment in the lead of the pencil that allows you to get just beautiful, vibrant colors. So now I've done two petals the same way, where I've put the pencil down and then I've added the medium. So on this pass, I might still have a little bit of color on my paintbrush, but I'm going to add medium first and just kind of get that leaf wet with a little bit of medium on it first. And then I'm going to come in and take my pencil. So as I'm approaching the petal this time, the pencil is being activated as soon as I put it down. And you will find some days you might prefer this way, and other days you prefer the other way. And maybe you only work one way the entire time. Learn to know what you like to do, but be open to change your mind. So let's add maybe just a hint here along the edge of this petal. And then again, taking my paintbrush and just blending those two together. Now, with any kind of painting or coloring, you're never going to know exactly the color it's going to be when it's dry until it's dry. So you know that it will fade a little bit as it dries, but you can always go back and then work it again on top. These colors are very workable that way, where you can have multiple layers of color that you've done and come back and just keep adding more if you really want to saturate an area or add some more blending or shading. You can absolutely come back. So that's the thing, is you don't have to panic if you don't like it the first try. One of my biggest rules in my classes are, if you don't like it, you're not done yet. So keep going. So we're going to let that dry for a little bit, and we'll move out into another area. This time I'm going to show you more of water. So let's say that if I want to have just sort of a soft watercolor look in the background here, I'm going to take the flat side of my pencil because if you try and draw like this, you will see those lines. So that you want to have as much of just a wash of color and not necessarily hard lines coming into this sort of area. And you can do it, you know, maybe add a few different colors, a little bit of blend of 2 different colors, have some fun. And then take your water brush. I do like to use the big wide tip when I'm doing a color wash like this. This is going to get the most water down through the bristles. By squeezing on the back, the water comes down through the bristles, and then you have a nice wet brush that then you can add water to your piece. I'm going to let that get pretty wet and allow the water to take the color wherever it wants to go. So I'm okay if the water comes into some of these areas, because I want to have this wash sort of happen in the background and then let it blossom into the other areas. After this is dry, I will come back and work in these other pieces, and that way they'll still be defined from the watercolor wash of the background. This will take a little bit of time for it to dry, so don't be impatient, which is hard to do sometimes. So when you've got this started, then you can go into another section and work, you know, in a different area while this is drying, and you can see exactly what the water is going to do. You might want to add more. You might be surprised on how much it travels, but let it do what it's going to do. This is a partnership after all. There is one other way that you can do detailed work without a paintbrush, and that's taking your pencil and dipping it directly into the medium. I don't dip it a lot, I just want to get a little bit on there, and that way when you come onto your piece, you are working with an activated pencil, and it allows you to be really particular with where you want that color to go. You will build up a little bit of a coating on your pencil when you do it like that, so you might, you know, want to scratch it off to the side after you're done so you don't end up with that staying on your pencil. But this is another way for you to do some really fine detail work without having to have a really fine detailed paintbrush. So what are some of the other ways that we can also color in something? One of the ways that you can use these pencils is by doing a single thread embroidery. This one's been done on an embroidery machine, but you can certainly do a free motion embroidery if you are so inclined as well. So instead of drawing out the lines or having the lines already on the fabric, this has been stitched in the hoop with just using a black thread on white fabric. This is basically giving me a nice little coloring book page to color, and I would use this in the similar way that I colored in our black and white fabric. Mainly focused on using medium, unless I wanted to have a more of a blended look or a blossomed look. Here is a sample of the same idea, slightly different design, where the butterfly was stitched in the hoop, just a black and white, black thread on white fabric, and then colored in using the pencils and a nice little fine brush in the fabric medium in order to get, you know, these colors activated into those areas without having any blossom or bloom happening in the background. That's going to be a personal choice. You may want to try, you know, to stitch out two and see which one you like better. It's a really fun way of creating a quilt that is absolutely done uniquely to you. Even if you tried to mimic your first block yourself, it's always going to be slightly different. That's part of the beauty of art. Speaking of coloring books, these can be a great way of getting some colorful inspirations. This is just one of many little books that I love to collect that have some fun designs in them in order for you to get inspired. They're designed to be colored in the book, but there's nothing that says you can't take this, draw this design out onto freezer paper, and then translate those lines that you are interested in onto the fabric. We'll start with something a little bit more simple, but you get the idea that there's a lot of inspiration in these kind of books. So let's look at just a really simple dragonfly. So here's a little shape of a dragonfly. I have traced it onto freezer paper using a Sharpie. Now, one of the things that I like to do, which is a little different from most times you're using freezer paper, usually you would draw on the paper side. When it comes to doing these kind of things, I actually like to draw on the shiny side. And the reason for that is when I then take this freezer paper and take a piece of fabric and I iron this on, you can see that I actually can see through this really well, even without having to use a light box or a window. I just decide how I want to orient this onto my fabric, and then I'm going to take it over to the iron and press it down so that the freezer paper is attached to the fabric. It doesn't have to be attached to any part of the fabric that I'm not going to be drawing on. It's mainly just to hold it and stabilize it as I trace this design onto the fabric. So I decide exactly which way I want to position my dragonfly. I like to press from the back side, so this is the paper side of the freezer paper. A nice hot, dry iron. Check the front to see if I don't, have any wrinkles that I want to get out. And we're ready to go. One of my favorite things to use to trace onto the fabric, and I'm going to be doing coloring with the watercolor pencils, is the outliner pencil. It will say outliner on the bottom down here. Every set of Inktense pencils comes with an outliner pencil except for the 12 set, but you can always buy them separately as well. The reason I like the outliner pencil is because it allows me to just trace the shape on the fabric, and it will look very similar to the pencils that I'm going to be using to color it in. The main difference between the outliner pencil and the other pencils in the set is that the outliner pencil is designed not to blend and bleed like the other pencils do. So it will hold its line a little bit more than if you were going to be trying to do this with one of the colored pencils, which would want to sort of reach out and move away from the line that you're creating. This will create a softer line so that when you go to color in your project, you won't see such a hard outline. If you want a harder outline, then using something like a micron pen or a fabric safe pen, then you can certainly use that instead. Or if you are feeling completely game and want to trace this design onto stabilizer and stitch it onto your fabric, you can do that as well. So now the fabric has our dragonfly design on it, and it's time to color. Just like when we were coloring in the black and white fabric, the same idea holds here. I'm just going to decide which color I want to start with and add a little bit here and there. I'm not thinking too hard about this at this stage. I'm going to allow it to explore and play. And I'm going to use a little bit of water in this. I'm going to let it move the color a little bit more than me try to control it. You'll notice that I'm just laying it down a little bit of water to start, just to kind of get the party started. And I'm not going directly out to all of those lines. I can take a dry brush and kind of move that color around a little bit so that I'm helping the water, but I'm not making the water go directly to that line with my water brush, which would then encourage it to go outside of that line. It might still happen, and if it does, I'm just going to redefine where that line is when I go to stitch this later on. Again, the most important thing to do when you are using watercolors is to not panic. And if it goes someplace that you didn't expect, follow it. Follow your art. That's my little tagline. So, we'll continue coloring this in, and then I will show you a little bit about the iridescent medium. as you can see, I added a little bit of extra colors in the black body of my dragonfly. Just the little bit of tiny coloring is going to give it help, sort of suggest that little bit more of an iridescent look that these little bugs have. The other way we can add iridescence is by using an iridescent medium. Now you can be using this as you're building, or you can come back on top after you've already got some going on. Again, it's just like normal fabric medium. The difference is when it has a little bit of glitter in it. So it's going to have a sheen to it. And when it dries, it will basically dry clear, but will have that glitter going on. And that's just a fun way of adding a little extra bling to your projects. A little bit can go a long way, even if it doesn't look like it's doing much when you first start. It's best not to overdo it and then let it dry and then come back and add more if you want. It's hard to get rid of the glitter if you've been going full bore with it from the get-go. But it is a fun way of adding just that little extra sparkle to suggest the iridescence of this little critter. To show you another example of how I like to take photos and then translate them onto fabric and using the colored pencils to color them in, here's what I like to refer to as my cooking show sample. Taking a picture that I took up near Glacier Park, the first thing I would do is I would take my Sharpie and I would outline the main components of this picture. And then I would translate that onto freezer paper, much like we did with the dragonfly, so that I have basically a coloring book page of the main elements of this photo. I would then take a piece of fabric, iron or press this down onto the freezer paper, and then taking my outliner pencil, draw those lines onto the fabric. At that point, then it's time to color it in. So here's, I've started to work with the different colors and pencils. You'll notice in some of these areas I'm actually playing with the texture, so as I'm coloring, I'm actually coloring more with a hard line to add a little bit of that texture in there as I'm coloring it in. Using a combination between water and medium, depending on how much I want to control, but playing more with water than anything and allowing the colors to expand and blend. Again, letting it dry, coming back and working on it a few times to kind of build up the color layers. So at this point, then I add a batting and a stabilizer, and my favorite is Totally Stable by Sulky. It's fantastic and it's inexpensive and it works like freezer paper, so you can just iron it on and tear off what you don't stitch. So I'll make my little sandwich using my colored fabric, batting, and a stabilizer, and add thread. And this is where, for me, the magic really happens, because I'm adding the texture of the thread on top of what I've colored with my pencils. So I'm creating basically what I call a twice painted quilt. You can also use these pencils in order to shade on already colored fabric, so different colors of batiks. If I wanted to add some more shadows to the fabrics that I've got on a project, I can absolutely start working on building up more contrasting color using the pencils. And again, medium is going to help you have more control. Water is going to blossom it more, so you have to just know what you're looking for. If you have a wide, big area of a fabric that you really want to alter the color, you might go for water. If you're just trying to work in a more controlled area, I would suggest using the medium, as that's going to give you a little bit more control about where your colors are going and ending. So you can just add just that little extra flavor to add a little bit more depth if the fabrics that you used in your project maybe aren't doing exactly what you had hoped. This is a chance where you can actually enhance them a bit, give you a little bit more contrast in your projects. I like to use the pencils in shading in landscapes. underneath other items, whether it's a rock or a critter, or like on the weeping wall, I will shade sometimes underneath the bust, just to give a little bit more texture and definition if the fabrics didn't happen to do that for you. Sometimes you get really lucky, and other times, you know, you need a little assist. These pencils are fantastic for giving you just that little bit of an assist. As another example, the tulip pattern I did using a single colored fabric on the tulips. And what this allows me to do is shade in areas that I wanted to have more contrast. Thanks again for joining me today. I hope you learned a little bit, got inspired, and are willing to jump into the pool and play with some pencils. They say that coloring is good for you, so you might as well, you know, be healthy, right? And have a little fun in the mix. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. You can visit me on my Facebook page, on Instagram, or you can even visit my website and use the little contact me button, and that will get you directly to my email, and I'll be happy to help troubleshoot any problems that you're having, questions that you have, or any projects that you're looking about maybe using the Inktense pencils on. I would be more than happy to collaborate with you on that. I'd also love to see projects that you're working on. So thanks again for taking the time to spend a little bit of time learning about Inktense and color on.